3 months after that morning at the shooting range, Sarah found herself in a Pentagon briefing room facing the Secretary of Defense and a panel of senior military leaders. The walls were lined with photographs of previous defense secretaries and joint chiefs, stern faces that seemed to judge every decision made in their presence. The demonstration that was supposed to be a simple evaluation had indeed changed everything, just not in ways Sarah had entirely expected. Within 2 weeks of her shots, the Pentagon had fast-tracked new integration policies for special operations units. Within a month, the first class of women had begun selection processes for previously closed positions, but Sarah's own situation had become more complicated. Instead of returning to operational duties, she'd been assigned to a joint task force developing advanced marksmanship training programs. Her techniques were being analyzed, codified, and prepared for implementation across all branches of service. "Commander Chen," the secretary said, consulting a thick folder that Sarah knew contained detailed analysis of her shooting performance. "Your demonstration has accelerated integration timelines by approximately 2 years. The evidence you provided gave us exactly what we needed to overcome institutional resistance." Sarah maintained her military bearing, but inside she felt conflicted. She was proud that her skills had opened doors for other qualified women, but frustrated that her own career had been sidetracked into administrative roles. "Sir, I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to policy development, but I respectfully request consideration for return to operational assignments. My team in Afghanistan is preparing for a mission that could benefit from my specific skill set." General Morrison, who had become an unlikely advocate after witnessing her performance, leaned forward. "Commander, the mission you're referring to has been classified above your current clearance level. However, I can tell you that the intelligence community has requested your involvement specifically because of capabilities you demonstrated." This was news to Sarah. She'd assumed that her shooting demonstration had typecast her as a training instructor rather than an operational asset. The possibility of returning to real missions sparked immediate interest. "What kind of involvement, sir?" The secretary exchanged glances with several other officials before responding. "There's a situation developing in Eastern Europe that requires precision engagement capabilities at extreme ranges. Traditional sniper teams have been unable to achieve the accuracy necessary for mission success." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This sounded like the kind of challenge she'd trained for, the reason she'd pushed herself to master techniques that most people considered impossible. "The target parameters exceed normal operational requirements," continued General Walsh, who had apparently become part of the planning committee. "We're looking at potential engagement distances of 1,200 yards or more in adverse weather conditions, with minimal opportunity for range estimation or environmental calibration." These were exactly the kinds of parameters that Sarah had been preparing for during her months of extreme range practice. The shots that had impressed the generals were actually conservative compared to some of the challenges she'd been working on. "Sir, I'd like to volunteer for this assignment," she said without hesitation. The secretary nodded, apparently expecting this response. "Before we discuss specifics, there are some things you need to understand. This mission will be highly classified, with operational security requirements that go beyond normal special operations protocols. Success could prevent a significant international incident. Failure could have consequences at the highest levels of government." Sarah had operated under similar pressure before, but never with such explicit acknowledgement of the political stakes involved. It was both thrilling and sobering to realize that her individual performance could influence international events. Additionally, General Morrison added, "This assignment will likely make you the first woman assigned to certain types of classified operations. There will be scrutiny from multiple directions. People hoping you succeed, people hoping you fail, and people analyzing every aspect of your performance for future policy decisions." This was the burden Sarah had been carrying since her first day in SEAL training. The knowledge that her performance would be judged not just on individual merit, but as representative of all women seeking similar opportunities. "Sir, I've been operating under that kind of scrutiny for my entire military career. It's not going to change how I approach the mission." Colonel Martinez, who had become something of a mentor in the months since the shooting demonstration, spoke up. "Commander, there's one more thing you should know. The target for this operation isn't a typical military objective. Intelligence suggests we're dealing with someone who has similar capabilities to your own. Exceptional marksmanship skills, advanced training, and experience in high-stakes operations. The implications were clear. This wouldn't just be a long-range shot against a stationary target. This would be a confrontation between two highly skilled operators, each trying to eliminate the other across distances that pushed the absolute limits of rifle accuracy. Sarah felt a familiar sensation, the combination of nervousness and excitement that preceded her most challenging missions. This was what she'd trained for, what all those hours on the range had been preparing her for. "When do we begin mission planning?" she asked. The secretary smiled for the first time during the meeting. "Your transport leaves for the briefing location. In 2 hours, Commander. Pack for extended operations in cold weather conditions. And Commander..." He paused, looking directly at her. "The whole world will be watching this one, even if they never know it happened." As Sarah left the Pentagon briefing room, she realized that the morning when she'd laughed at 3 skeptical generals had been just the beginning of a much larger story. Now she faced the ultimate test of the skills and determination that had brought her this far. The real mission was about to begin. Elena returned to the shooting range 3 days later, then again the following week. What started as casual visits quickly became a routine that Marcus found himself anticipating. Unlike other regulars who came to socialize or show off, Elena approached each session with quiet intensity, treating every shot like a lesson to be learned. By her 6th visit, she was consistently outperforming members who'd been shooting for years. Marcus started giving her more challenging exercises, longer distances, smaller targets, awkward shooting positions. Elena met each challenge with the same focused determination, never complaining about difficulty or celebrating success. "You're ready for something bigger than my basic range," Marcus told her one afternoon as she finished placing 10 consecutive shots within a 2-inch circle at 50 yards. "There's a regional competition coming up next month. Nothing too serious, but it might be interesting for you to see what competitive shooting looks like." Elena lowered the rifle and looked at him with those quiet, thoughtful eyes. "What kind of competition?" "Mixed disciplines. Precision shooting at various distances, some speed challenges, basic marksmanship tests. Good way to get your feet wet without jumping into the deep end." "I'd like to try it," she said simply. Marcus smiled. He'd been hoping she'd say that. Over the past month, he'd grown genuinely curious about Elena's potential. Her progress defied every pattern he'd observed in 3 decades of shooting instruction. Most people hit plateaus, struggled with specific techniques, or developed bad habits that took time to correct. Elena just kept improving with mathematical precision. The Tri-State Regional Championship was held at a sprawling facility 2 hours north of Cedar Ridge. Marcus arrived early with Elena, wanting to give her time to adjust to the unfamiliar environment. The scale of the event was modest by competitive standards, maybe 200 participants across all categories. But for someone who'd never experienced organized shooting sports, it would be overwhelming. Elena seemed to absorb the bustling activity with the same quiet observation she brought to everything else. Shooters unpacking expensive equipment, coaches discussing strategy, officials explaining rules and procedures. She watched it all without comment, but Marcus could see her cataloging details, understanding the culture she was stepping into. The beginner division included 3 events: precision shooting at 100 yards, rapid fire at 50 yards, and a practical accuracy challenge involving multiple targets at varying distances. Elena had practiced similar exercises during her training, but competition added pressure that changed everything. "Remember, this is just for experience," Marcus reminded her as they reviewed the schedule. "Don't worry about scores or rankings. Focus on shooting your best and learning from what you see." Elena nodded, but something in her expression suggested she had different plans. The precision event came first. Competitors had 20 minutes to fire 20 shots at a standard target 100 yards away. Elena's group included mostly middle-aged men who'd been shooting competitively for years, along with a few younger enthusiasts hoping to make their mark. Marcus watched from the spectator area, as Elena settled into position. She'd borrowed one of his more advanced rifles, a precision instrument that demanded respect and understanding. During practice, she'd adapted to its characteristics quickly, but competition was different. The first shot cracked across the range, followed by 19 more over the next 15 minutes. Elena maintained her characteristic composure throughout, never rushing, never showing frustration or excitement. When the ceasefire was called, she simply stood and stepped back, waiting for scoring like everyone else. The scores came back slowly. Marcus felt his eyebrows rise as he read Elena's target. 192 out of 200 possible points, with most shots clustered in the 8, 9, and 10 rings. It was a respectable score for anyone, and remarkable for someone in her first competition. But what really caught his attention was the pattern of her shots. While other shooters showed the normal variation of competitive nerves, some shots pulled left under pressure, others jerked high from rushed trigger control. Elena's shots showed no such inconsistency. They were simply accurate to the limits of her current skill level. The rapid-fire event told a similar story. Where the time pressure caused most beginners to spray bullets wildly, Elena maintained her disciplined approach. She fired slower than the time limit required, but every shot was deliberate and controlled. Her score of 178 put her in third place among novice competitors. During the lunch break, other shooters began to notice the quiet woman who was quietly demolishing the beginner division. Marcus overheard conversations speculating about her background, military training perhaps, or years of practice she wasn't admitting to. "She shoots like someone who's been doing this for decades," remarked Bill Harrison, a veteran competitor who'd won the regional championship 3 times. "You sure she's really new to this?" Marcus nodded, though he was beginning to wonder himself. Elena's progress seemed almost supernatural, defying everything he understood about skill development in shooting sports. The practical accuracy challenge proved most revealing. Set up like a hunting scenario, it required shooters to engage targets at distances ranging from 75 to 200 yards, some partially concealed behind barriers or positioned at awkward angles. Most beginners struggled with the complexity, but Elena approached it like she was solving a mathematical equation. She studied each target carefully before taking position, calculating angles and distances with the patience of someone who understood that rushing led to mistakes. Her shots rang out with mechanical precision, each one carefully planned and executed. When the final scores were posted, Elena had won the beginner division by a margin that raised eyebrows throughout the facility. More impressive than her victory was the consistency of her performance across all 3 disciplines. While other competitors showed strengths and weaknesses in different areas, Elena had simply shot well at everything. "That was incredible," Marcus told her as they packed up equipment. "I've never seen someone take to competition shooting so naturally." Elena smiled, but something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely surprised by her performance. "It felt right," she said quietly. "Like this is what I was meant to be doing." As they drove home, Marcus found himself thinking about Elena's words. In his experience, people either loved shooting or they didn't, but few described it as their destiny. There was something almost spiritual about the way Elena approached the sport, as if she'd discovered a missing piece of herself. He had no way of knowing that Elena's success today was just the beginning, or that her quiet confidence came from memories she hadn't yet shared with anyone. All he knew was that he'd just witnessed something extraordinary, and he was eager to see where Elena's journey would lead next. Word of Elena's regional victory spread quickly through the competitive shooting community. Within weeks, she was receiving invitations to larger competitions and offers of sponsorship from equipment manufacturers. But Elena remained focused on her training, spending increasingly long hours at the range perfecting techniques that seemed to come naturally to her. Marcus noticed changes in her approach during this period. Where she'd initially been content with standard distances and targets, Elena began asking about longer-range shooting. She studied ballistics tables with the intensity of a graduate student, learning about wind drift, bullet drop, and atmospheric conditions that affected accuracy at extended distances. "I want to try shooting at 500 yards, she told Marcus one morning as they reviewed her training plan. Marcus paused in his equipment check. 500 yards was serious long-range shooting, requiring different skills and equipment than anything Elena had attempted. Most competitive shooters took years to work up to such distances. That's a big jump from what you've been doing, he said carefully. We'd need to set up at the outdoor range, get you familiar with different optics, teach you about reading wind conditions. I understand, Elena replied, but I think I'm ready. Something in her tone convinced him not to argue. Over the past 3 months, Elena had consistently exceeded his expectations. If she thought she was ready for long-range shooting, maybe it was worth exploring. They drove to the extended range facility the next weekend, a sprawling complex that offered shooting distances up to 1,000 yards. Elena examined the setup with her characteristic quiet intensity, studying the wind flags positioned at intervals along the range, the elevated shooting positions, and the distant targets that appeared as tiny dots to the naked eye. Marcus set her up with a precision rifle equipped with a high-power scope, explaining the complexities of long-range shooting as they worked, wind speed and direction, temperature and humidity effects, the precise calculations needed to compensate for bullet drop over extended distances. Elena listened to every detail, asking technical questions that demonstrated she was processing the information at a deeper level than most students. When Marcus finished his explanation, she settled behind the rifle and began studying the distant target through the scope. The first shot at 500 yards took her nearly 5 minutes to execute. Marcus watched her go through a methodical process, checking wind conditions, calculating adjustments, controlling her breathing, and finally squeezing the trigger with the patience of a master craftsman. The shot struck the target's 8 ring, an impressive result for someone's first attempt at long-range precision shooting. But what amazed Marcus was Elena's reaction. Instead of celebrating or showing excitement, she simply cycled the rifle's bolt and began preparing for the second shot. That felt right, she said quietly, adjusting her scope slightly. I can see how this works. Over the next 2 hours, Elena fired 30 rounds at the 500-yard target. By the end of the session, she was consistently placing shots in the target's center rings, groups that would have been respectable from experienced long-range shooters. You have a gift for this, Marcus told her as they cleaned the rifle. I've never seen someone adapt to long-range shooting so quickly. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying the distant targets through binoculars. My grandfather used to tell stories, she said eventually, about hunters in the mountains where my family came from. He said some people were born with the ability to see far and shoot straight. It was the first personal detail Elena had shared about her background, and Marcus sensed there was more to the story. But he'd learned not to push for information Elena wasn't ready to share. Their long-range training became a weekly routine. Elena progressed to 600 yards, then 700, then 800. Each distance brought new challenges, more complex calculations, greater wind sensitivity, tiny errors that were magnified over long ranges. Elena met each challenge with the same methodical approach, treating every shot as a physics problem to be solved. Word of her long-range abilities reached David Chen, a former military sniper who'd transitioned into competitive shooting after his service. Chen had won multiple national championships in precision rifle competitions, and he made a point of visiting Cedar Ridge to see Elena shoot. I heard there was a new shooter making waves, Chen said as he introduced himself. Mind if I watch? You work? Elena nodded politely and continued her routine at the 800-yard line. Chen observed her shooting process with the critical eye of someone who understood the subtleties of precision marksmanship. After Elena fired a 10-shot group that could be covered with a playing card, Chen approached Marcus with obvious interest. Where did she learn to shoot like that? Chen asked. Here mostly, Marcus replied. She's been training for about 6 months. Chen looked skeptical. 6 months? Are you sure she doesn't have military background? Maybe family in law enforcement? Marcus shook his head. Elena's rapid progress had raised similar questions from other experienced shooters, but he'd never gotten satisfactory answers about her background. She says she never touched a rifle before walking into my range, Marcus said, and I believe her. But you're right. Her shooting doesn't match someone with 6 months of experience. Chen watched Elena cycle through another string of shots. each one placed with mechanical precision despite the challenging crosswind conditions. "I'd like to invite her to the National Precision Championship," Chen said finally. "It's probably too advanced for someone at her level, but she might learn something from competing against the country's best shooters." The National Precision Championship was held annually in Wyoming, attracting the top precision rifle shooters from across North America. Distances ranged from 600 to 200 yards, and competitors included Olympic-level marksmen, military snipers, and professional shooters who dedicated their lives to the sport. When Marcus relayed the invitation to Elena, her reaction was immediate and decisive. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I want to compete." "Elena, this is the highest level of precision shooting competition in the country," Marcus warned. "These are shooters who've been perfecting their skills for decades. The distances alone will be challenging." Elena looked at him with those calm, dark eyes that seemed to hold depths he couldn't fathom. "I think I'll be fine," she said quietly. As they began planning for the championship, Marcus found himself wondering about the stories Elena's grandfather used to tell about mountain hunters with natural gifts for long-range shooting. He was beginning to suspect that Elena's rapid progress wasn't just natural talent. It was something deeper, something connected to heritage and instinct that went beyond normal skill development. He had no idea that Elena's confidence came from memories that were beginning to surface, or that her grandfather's stories weren't just folklore. All he knew was that in 2 months, he'd be watching his student compete against the best precision shooters in North America. And despite her limited experience, he was starting to believe she might surprise everyone. The Wyoming landscape stretched endlessly under a crystalline blue sky as Marcus and Elena arrived at the National Precision Championship. The event was held at Thunder Ridge, a facility specifically designed for extreme long-range shooting, where targets could be engaged at distances exceeding a mile. Elena had spent the 2-month preparation period pushing her skills to new limits, regularly shooting at 1,000 yards and beyond. What struck Marcus most during their training wasn't just Elena's continued improvement, but the way she seemed to understand concepts that typically took years to master. Wind reading, atmospheric compensation, the subtle ballistics differences between various ammunition lots. Elena absorbed it all with the efficiency of someone remembering rather than learning. The championship field included 96 competitors representing the elite of precision shooting, former military snipers, Olympic medalists, professional shooters sponsored by major manufacturers, and seasoned competitors who'd spent decades perfecting their craft. Elena, at 25 with less than 8 months of shooting experience, was by far the least experienced participant. "Don't let the competition intimidate you," Marcus advised as they registered. "Focus on your own shooting, execute your process, and treat it like any other range session." Elena nodded, studying the competitor list with interest rather than anxiety. She'd been unusually quiet during their travel, and Marcus sensed she was processing something important. Her confidence seemed different now, not the cautious optimism of a developing shooter, but the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of. The first day's competition covered distances from 600 to 900 yards. Elena drew a starting position in the middle of the field, which meant she'd watch half the competitors shoot before her turn came. Most shooters use this time to analyze wind conditions and observe successful techniques, but Elena seemed more interested in the mountains visible in the distance. "Those peaks look familiar," she said quietly, as they waited for her relay to begin. Marcus glanced at the rugged skyline. "Ever been to Wyoming before?" Elena shook her head slowly. "No, but my family came from mountains like these. Different continent, but the same feeling." When her turn came, Elena settled into position behind her rifle with the same methodical calm she brought to every shooting session. The 600-yard target appeared impossibly small through the scope, but Elena's first shot struck dead center. The following 9 shots formed a group tight enough to be covered with a quarter. By the time the 900-yard stage concluded, Elena was leading the rookie division and placing 3rd overall. Her consistency across different distances had caught the attention of seasoned competitors, many of whom approached Marcus with questions about her background. She shoots like she's been doing this for 20 years, commented Sarah Williams, a three-time national champion. Are you sure she's really new to competitive shooting? Marcus was getting tired of the question, partly because he was beginning to wonder himself. Elena's performance defied every pattern of skill development he'd observed in his career. But he'd watched her progress from complete beginner to elite competitor, and he knew her claims about her inexperience were truthful. The second day brought the championship's ultimate challenge, precision shooting at 200 yards. At this distance, targets appeared as tiny specks even through high-powered optics. Environmental factors became critical. A 1-mile-per-hour wind change could move bullets several inches, and atmospheric pressure differences could affect trajectory. Significantly, Elena spent the morning studying conditions with unprecedented focus. She watched wind flags for patterns, tested atmospheric readings with scientific precision, and observed other shooters' impact points to understand how conditions were affecting bullet flight. The wind's shifting every few minutes, Marcus observed, as they prepared her equipment. It's going to be tough to predict. Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring at the distant mountains. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a certainty that surprised him. The wind patterns follow the terrain, she said. Watch how it flows around that ridgeline, then drops into the valley. It's not random. There's a rhythm to it. Marcus studied the landscape with new eyes, trying to see what Elena was seeing. He'd been shooting long range for 15 years, but Elena seemed to understand atmospheric dynamics at an intuitive level that went beyond technical knowledge. When Elena's relay was called to the firing line, she moved with purposeful confidence. The other shooters in her group included some of the sport's biggest names: former military snipers, world record holders, shooters who dominated long-range competitions for decades. Elena's first shot at 200 yards took nearly 7 minutes to execute. She waded through multiple wind changes, made delicate scope adjustments, and finally squeezed the trigger when conditions aligned perfectly. The shot struck the target's X-ring, the highest possible score. The pattern repeated for 19 more shots over the next 2 hours. While other shooters struggled with changing conditions and recorded mixed results, Elena maintained almost mechanical precision. She seemed to read wind patterns before they became visible on the flags, compensating for atmospheric changes with adjustments that proved consistently accurate. When the final scores were calculated, Elena had achieved something unprecedented in the championship's history. Not only had she won the rookie division by the largest margin ever recorded, she'd also finished second overall, behind only David Chen, the former military sniper who'd invited her to compete. The shooting community's reaction was immediate and intense. Elena's performance made headlines in shooting sports publications, and videos of her record-setting group circulated widely online. But for Elena, the victory seemed to answer questions she'd been carrying for months. It felt like coming home, she told Marcus as they packed their equipment, like I was doing something I was born for. That evening, at the championship banquet, Elena was asked to speak about her rapid rise in competitive shooting. She stood before an audience of the sport's most accomplished athletes, many of whom had decades more experience than her 8 months of training. I used to think talent was something you developed through practice, Elena said quietly. But I'm starting to understand that sometimes talent is something you remember. My grandfather told stories about hunters in our family, who could shoot at distances others thought impossible. I think those stories weren't just folklore. After her speech, Chen approached Elena with obvious respect. I've been shooting competitively for 12 years, he said. I've never seen anyone master long-range precision the way you have. That performance today wasn't just skill. It was artistry. Elena smiled. But Marcus noticed something different in her expression. The uncertainty that had characterized her early training was gone, replaced by quiet confidence that seemed to run deeper than recent success. I think I'm ready to try 1,500 yards, she said, as they prepared to leave Wyoming. Marcus looked at her carefully. 1,500 yards was extreme long-range shooting, attempted by only the most advanced precision shooters. But after watching Elena's performance over the past 3 days, he was beginning to believe she might be capable of anything. We'll work up to it gradually, he said. Elena nodded, but something in her eyes suggested she wouldn't need much time to prepare. As they drove away from Thunder Ridge, Marcus found himself wondering about the stories Elena's grandfather used to tell, and whether talent really could be inherited across generations like some kind of genetic memory. He had no idea that Elena's success was about to attract attention from people who understood exactly where her abilities came from, or that her family's history held secrets that would soon change everything about her life. 3 weeks after Elena's stunning performance in Wyoming, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. The caller identified himself as Colonel James Mitchell, retired from Army Special Operations, and he wanted to meet Elena personally. "I saw the footage from Thunder Ridge," Mitchell explained during their conversation. "That kind of precision shooting isn't developed in 8 months regardless of natural talent. I'd like to talk with Miss Vasquez about her background." Marcus was protective of Elena's privacy, but something in Mitchell's tone suggested this wasn't casual curiosity. When he relayed the request to Elena, her reaction was immediate and surprising. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'll meet with him." Mitchell arrived at Cedar Ridge the following Tuesday, a lean man in his 60s whose bearing still reflected decades of military service. He watched Elena shoot for 2 hours without comment, observing her technique with the analytical eye of someone who understood the subtleties of precision marksmanship at the highest level. After Elena finished her session, Mitchell approached her directly. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly, "and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Have you ever heard the name Carlos Vasquez?" Elena's rifle slipped slightly in her hands. The color drained from her face, and for the first time since Marcus had known her, she appeared genuinely shaken. "That was my grandfather's name," she whispered. "But he died when I was 12. How do you know about him?" Mitchell nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he'd suspected. "Because Carlos Vasquez was one of the most legendary snipers who ever lived," he said. "During the conflicts in South America in the 1970s and 80s, he achieved shots that military historians still study. There were stories about a mountain fighter who could engage targets at distances others thought impossible." Elena sat down heavily on a nearby bench, her composure finally cracking. "He never talked about the wars," she said quietly. "Only about hunting in the mountains. He used to say our family had a gift for shooting, but I thought he meant hunting, deer and rabbits." Mitchell's expression softened with understanding. "Men like your grandfather often didn't discuss their wartime experiences," he explained. "But his reputation in military circles was extraordinary. Some of the shots attributed to him were at distances exceeding 3,200 meters, over 2 miles. Most experts believed those stories were exaggerated until now." The number hit Elena like a physical blow. Marcus watched her hands tremble slightly as she processed this information about her grandfather's legendary status. 3,200 meters? Elena repeated. "That's impossible. No one can shoot accurately at that distance." Mitchell smiled grimly. "That's what everyone thought. But your performance at Thunder Ridge suggests the Vasquez family's reputation might be more than folklore. The precision and instinct you've demonstrated aren't normal, even among elite shooters." Over the next hour, Mitchell shared what military historians knew about Carlos Vasquez. Stories of impossible shots in mountainous terrain, tactical situations where a single sniper had changed the outcome of battles, and a legendary accuracy that became the stuff of military legend. After the conflicts ended, he disappeared, Mitchell explained. "Most assumed he'd been killed, but there were rumors he'd emigrated to North America with his family. We never confirmed those reports until now." Elena listened to these revelations about her grandfather with a mixture of amazement and growing understanding. Details from her childhood that hadn't made sense before began to form a clearer picture. "He used to take me hiking in the mountains, near our town," she said slowly. "He'd point out landmarks miles away and describe them perfectly, like he could see details that were impossible to make out. I thought everyone could do that." "Did he ever teach you to shoot?" Mitchell asked. Elena shook her head. "He died before I was old enough, but he used to tell me stories about reading the wind, understanding how weather affected the flight of bullets. calculating distances by observing terrain features. I thought they were just stories. Marcus finally understood why Elena's shooting had seemed like remembering rather than learning. She'd been absorbing lessons from her grandfather without realizing their significance. There's something else, Mitchell continued. The military community is very interested in documenting your grandfather's legacy. If you're willing, we'd like to arrange a demonstration at our advanced training facility. There's a specific distance we'd like you to attempt. What distance? Elena asked, though something in her expression suggested she already knew. 200 meters, Mitchell replied. The same distance your grandfather was reported to have mastered. The challenge was arranged for the following month at Fort Carson, Colorado, home to one of the military's most advanced long-range shooting facilities. Elena spent the intervening weeks preparing with an intensity that surprised even Marcus. She studied advanced ballistics, weather patterns, and atmospheric physics with the dedication of a doctoral student. But more than technical preparation, Elena seemed to be accessing something deeper. She spoke of dreams where her grandfather appeared, sharing knowledge about reading environmental conditions and understanding the physics of extreme distance shooting. It's like he's teaching me things I should have learned years ago, she told Marcus one evening after an especially productive training session. The day of the attempt dawned clear and cold at Fort Carson. Elena had drawn an audience of military, snipers, competitive shooters, and ballistics experts, all curious to see if the Vasquez family legend could be validated. The 3,200-meter target was positioned on a distant hillside, barely visible even through high-powered spotting scopes. At this distance, Elena would need to compensate for significant bullet drop, wind drift that could move projectiles several feet, and atmospheric conditions that changed constantly over the bullet's flight path. Elena spent 2 hours studying conditions before attempting her first shot. She used equipment her grandfather could never have imagined: precision rifles with advanced optics, weather monitoring devices, and ballistic computers that calculated environmental factors automatically. But when she settled into position behind the rifle, Elena seemed to access knowledge that went beyond technology. She made scope adjustments based on intuition rather than calculations, compensating for wind patterns she seemed to sense rather than measure. The first shot took nearly 10 minutes to execute. When it finally came, the massive rifle's report echoed across the Colorado landscape. Spotters on the distant hillside confirmed impact. 8 inches from the target's center, Elena's second shot struck within 4 inches of center. The third was even closer. By her 10th shot, Elena had achieved something unprecedented in modern shooting history. She'd not only matched her grandfather's legendary accuracy at 3,200 meters, she'd exceeded it, consistently placing shots within the target's scoring rings at a distance most experts considered beyond the limits of human capability. As news of Elena's achievement spread through military and civilian shooting communities, Marcus finally understood what he'd been witnessing. Over the past year, Elena hadn't just developed exceptional shooting skills through practice and natural talent. She'd inherited a legacy of precision marksmanship that connected her to her grandfather's legendary abilities. The quiet woman who'd walked into his range as a complete beginner had discovered she was part of a family tradition that stretched back generations, a genetic gift for extreme distance shooting that had skipped a generation but never truly disappeared. Standing on the firing line at Fort Carson, watching Elena achieve shots that defied conventional understanding of marksmanship, Marcus realized he'd been privileged to witness something extraordinary, not just the development of exceptional skill, but the awakening of inherited ability that connected Elena to her grandfather's legendary legacy. As Elena packed her equipment after the successful demonstration, Colonel Mitchell approached with obvious respect and amazement. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said quietly. "You've not only validated his legend, you've extended it into a new generation." Elena smiled, finally at peace with abilities she was only beginning to understand. The uncertain young woman who'd nervously approached his counter a year ago had discovered her true identity, not just as an exceptional shooter, but as the inheritor of a family tradition that stretched across continents and generations. Marcus watched her with profound satisfaction. knowing he'd played a small part in helping Elena discover who she really was. Her journey from complete beginner to legendary marksman had challenged everything he thought he knew about talent, inheritance, and the mysterious ways that ability could be passed down through bloodlines. But even as Elena basked in the recognition of her achievement, Marcus sensed this was just the beginning. The shooting world would never be the same, and Elena's story would inspire others to push the boundaries of what seemed possible in precision marksmanship. Her grandfather's legacy lived on, carried forward by a granddaughter who'd finally understood her true calling. 6 months after Elena's record-breaking demonstration at Fort Carson, her life had transformed in ways neither she nor Marcus could have imagined. The footage of her 3,200-meter shots had gone viral, attracting international attention from military, organizations, equipment manufacturers, and media outlets fascinated by her story. Elena found herself in demand as both competitor and instructor, traveling to shooting events around the world where her performances consistently broke records and challenged conventional wisdom about the limits of precision marksmanship. But success hadn't changed her fundamental nature. She remained the same quietly focused woman who treated each shot as a sacred responsibility. Marcus accompanied Elena to most of her major competitions, serving as both coach and friend during her meteoric rise to prominence. What amazed him most wasn't her continued success, but the way she'd embraced her grandfather's legacy while making it entirely her own. "I used to think I was just learning to shoot," Elena told him during a quiet moment at the World Long Range Championship in New Zealand. "Now I understand I was remembering something that was always part of me." Elena had just completed another dominant performance, winning the championship by margins that left other competitors shaking their heads in amazement. Her consistency at extreme distances had become legendary, and shooting sports commentators had begun referring to shots beyond 2,500 meters as Vasquez range. The transformation went deeper than competitive success. Elena had begun working with military training programs, sharing insights about long-range shooting that came from intuition rather than textbooks. Her ability to read environmental conditions and predict bullet behavior at extreme distances had advanced the understanding of precision marksmanship in ways that surprised ballistics experts. "She sees things the rest of us miss," explained Dr. Sarah Chen, a ballistics researcher who'd collaborated with Elena on several technical studies. "Her understanding of atmospheric effects and wind patterns operates at a level that goes beyond current scientific models." Elena had also begun searching for other members of her extended family, hoping to learn more about her grandfather's history and the origins of their unusual abilities. Through genealogical research and contacts in South American military circles, she'd discovered that Carlos Vasquez was part of a mountain community known for producing exceptional hunters and warriors. "There were maybe 20 families in the region where my grandfather grew up," Elena explained to Marcus as they reviewed historical documents Colonel Mitchell had helped locate. Stories suggest several bloodlines carried similar gifts for extreme distance shooting, but most were lost during the conflicts of the 1970s. The research had revealed that Elena might not be the only surviving member of these legendary shooting families. Reports suggested other descendants had emigrated to different countries, possibly carrying similar latent abilities without understanding their significance. Elena had begun organizing a foundation dedicated to preserving the history of these mountain marksmen and potentially identifying other individuals who might possess inherited shooting abilities. The Carlos Vasquez Foundation combined historical research with practical training, offering scholarships to young shooters and supporting advanced research into the genetic and psychological factors that contributed to exceptional marksmanship. "My grandfather's generation kept their abilities secret because of the wars," Elena said during a foundation fundraising event. "Our generation has the opportunity to study and celebrate these gifts, to understand how they can be developed and passed on." The foundation's work had attracted international attention from researchers interested in genetic predisposition to specific skills. Elena participated in studies examining everything from eye-hand coordination to spatial processing abilities, contributing to scientific understanding of how complex motor skills could be inherited. But Elena's greatest satisfaction came from individual students who showed exceptional promise. She'd begun accepting a small number of private pupils, working with shooters who demonstrated unusual natural ability and helping them develop their potential. Marcus often observed these training sessions, fascinated by Elena's teaching methods. She approached instruction the same way she approached shooting, with patience, precision, and an intuitive understanding that went beyond technical knowledge. "Watch how she reads the students' natural tendencies," Marcus noted to Colonel Mitchell during one of Elena's workshops. "She doesn't just teach technique, she helps people discover abilities they didn't know they possessed." One of Elena's most promising students was 16-year-old Maria Santos, whose family had emigrated from the same South American region as Elena's grandfather. Maria had shown exceptional promise during her first shooting lessons, demonstrating the same rapid skill development that had characterized Elena's early training. "I think she might be from one of the other families," Elena told Marcus as they watched Maria consistently hit targets at 800 yards during only her third month of training. "Her instincts for reading wind and calculating distances are too advanced for normal skill development." The possibility that Elena had identified another inheritor of these legendary shooting abilities created excitement throughout the precision shooting community. If Maria's development continued following the same pattern as Elena's, it would provide valuable insights into how these unusual talents manifested and could be cultivated. As Elena's second year in competitive shooting concluded, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey they'd shared. The uncertain beginner who'd walked into his range had become not just a legendary marksman, but a bridge between her grandfather's wartime legacy and a new generation of precision shooters. Elena's story had inspired thousands of shooters around the world to push their own boundaries, to explore the limits of human accuracy and precision. But more importantly, she demonstrated that talent could be inherited across generations, that abilities could lie dormant for decades before awakening when the right circumstances aligned. Standing on the firing line at Elena's latest competition, watching her prepare for another record-breaking attempt at 3,500 meters, Marcus marveled at the transformation he'd witnessed. The quiet woman who'd once asked nervously about trying shooting had become the most celebrated precision marksman of her generation, carrying forward a family legacy that connected her to legendary figures from military history. Elena's final shot of the competition struck dead center at a distance most experts still considered impossible. As the crowd erupted in amazement, Elena simply smiled and began cleaning her rifle with the same methodical care she brought to everything. "Thank you," she said quietly to Marcus as they packed up their equipment, "for believing in me before I believed in myself." Marcus nodded, knowing he'd been privileged to play a small role in one of the most remarkable stories in shooting sports history. Elena had not only discovered her own extraordinary abilities, she'd opened new possibilities for understanding how exceptional talents could be preserved and passed down through generations. Her grandfather's legacy lived on, carried forward by a granddaughter who'd transformed family folklore into modern legend, proving that some gifts transcended time and circumstances to emerge when they were most needed.